Hey, Magnus here. So the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K was announced and released, and YouTubers and other cinematographers are getting it already. And on that camera, they put an EF mount, similar to any Canon camera like this 5D Mark IV. So it seems like a pretty interesting camera mount. Was it the right one? It's not a bad decision, but it might be the wrong decision. Here we go. Okay, so first talking about the surprise announcement a couple of weeks ago about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Did I say 4K? No, I meant 6K. So 6K is the latest Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera to come out that really just took what was great about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K and enhanced it. So what did they get wrong? Why did they get the lens mount wrong? It's not bad, it's just wrong, my opinion. So if you're new to this channel, I talk about cameras when it comes to DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, specifically for videos. So if you want to hear about this talk, some tips and tricks and a few hacks, subscribe to my channel and hit that notification button and you'll stay up to date with what I've got to say. So talking about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K, such a long name. Let's just call it the Pocket Cinema 6K. So the Pocket Cinema 6K was announced a couple of weeks ago, like I said, and it's got an EF mount, like this Canon camera. Now that in itself is a great thing. The Canon lineup has an insane amount of EF glass that you could just put on this camera natively and be able to shoot right away. With a 1.6 times crop factor on that super 35mm sensor, and you're able to just pop it on and go for incredible 6K video. Then why would EF be a bad decision or the wrong decision? Well, EF is technically not a bad decision, just like I said, but the wrong decision is because we're moving forward in time when it comes to the mirrorless revolution. Mirrorless cameras are taking over. I mean, this Pocket Cinema Camera 6K is a mirrorless camera in itself, and it added a huge flange distance that was unnecessary and unneeded when you could have something much more adaptable. Like when they released the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, they used a micro four thirds lens mount, and the sensor is actually slightly bigger than micro four thirds at a 4/3 sized sensor. So what you're able to get with that EF mount, like I said, is the Canon lens lineup. But what you're seriously lacking, unfortunately, is the adaptability of different lens types. Not just EF lens types, not just micro four thirds lens types, but any other mounting system that you create, you can pop in on the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K due to that reduced flange distance. Now what flange distance is the back of your lens and the actual sensor has a set distance. Now it's bigger on an EF mount because EF is designed for a mirror to actually be in between the back of the lens and the actual sensor. And because it needs that extra room, you're gonna have these type of lenses needing a sensor to be a certain, pretty much longer than necessary distance on what you would require on a mirrorless camera. So mirrorless cameras have a lot shorter flange distances. What that means is when you have a mirrorless camera and a mirrorless mount, but you want to put EF glass, because the EF glass is meant to focus on a longer distance in between the sensor and the back of the lens, you can add adapters and actually put EF glass on micro four thirds or other mirrorless systems, such as you can convert Canon lenses, the EF glass, onto Sony full frame glass specifically because of that reduced flange distance. So it's simple, right? Pocket Cinema Camera 4K used it, but the 6K didn't. Now, there is Canon's lineup of RF. RF lenses are designed for Canon's full frame mirrorless cameras, such as the Canon EOS RP and the Canon EOS R. Those cameras are designed for shorter flange distances but full frame lenses. But here's the other advantage to that. The Canon RF Mount has the ability, when you're adapting, for example, to use ND filters in the back of your lenses. So that adapter, along with the ability to use those type of ND filters, allow for additional flexibility on pretty much all of your lenses. And you don't get that, unfortunately, with an EF mount. Also, what you don't get, which I mentioned previously, is the ability to adapt multiple lens types to that camera. It's not just about reduced focal distance, but I'll get to that. So continuing on, you have all of those other features that you're able to do, but the final feature that everybody talks about is the fact that you get the simulation of a larger sensor by using a speed booster or a focal reducer in between your lens and the camera. Now you have the ability to do that just by attaching the mount, and sure, it's a bit of added glass which might reduce your clarity, but in the same time you can actually increase the amount of light that hits this sensor and also increase the ability of that lens to your sensor to give you a shallower depth of field, which you might be looking for in specific shots. You can get excellent shallow depth of field on a Super 35 sensor with native glass, but usually when you want that ability, you have to pay for more expensive lenses. If you're looking at the fact that it's cropped 1.68 times and you take Canon's EF glass, you're limited to, for example, let's say you get a 50mm f1.2L lens from Canon. That, you take that and multiply it. Let me get my calculator on my phone here. So an f1.2 would be about a 1.92, almost an f2.0 lens, if you simulate it to a full frame comparison. Now when it comes to a micro four thirds sensor, you can use the benefit of the focal reducer and get a shallower depth of field and actually use more of your EF lens than what you're permitted off of the native EF mounting system of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. Now there is a focal reducer plan by Lucas Adapters to actually mount the focal reducer in the actual camera. Now you got to play with the insides a little bit and do some modifications to your camera, which doesn't seem to be too complicated, and then you can actually use a focal reducer on that as well. But it's a little bit trickier, and I know that most people probably wouldn't be too much of a fan of doing that versus just attaching an adapter. But it is there, and it is a possibility. So that is somewhat exciting, but we have to wait and see if and when that gets released. So all in all, I talked about the fact that the lens mount system is not the right choice. Another thing that I actually mentioned in my last video, which I wanted to touch upon, is the actual price. Now a 6K Super 35 camera that shoots RAW for $24.95. When you listen to that, and actually other benefits that the camera does have, such as better highlight recovery and just overall detail compared to the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. I mean, you've got 120 frames per second at slightly higher than 1080p when compared to the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K and compared to most cameras. And this camera is just a steal at the price point of $24.95. However, when you look at the differences between the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K and the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K, that's when you start to realize that this is a lot more of a tough question to ask than once anticipated. So yes, it's a great bargain for a 6K camera, but compare that to your actual needs. Now those that are filming high quality cinema normally would go even more expensive. So to have a small, nice little 6K camera that has boatload of abilities at that low price point, great. But when you have those that are slightly tighter budget, that are trying to pick up their cinema game, do they need to reach out and grab a 6K camera? Or can they produce just fine with the 4K camera, like I'm doing right now for this little talking head segment that I'm doing? To have the differences compared, let's look at them, and then let's compare the price difference and see, is that worth it? So for $12.95 with the Pocket Cinema 4K, you get resolutions up to 4096 by 2160, so 4K at 60 frames per second. On all settings from 1080p to the 4K, you get to choose between Blackmagic RAW and ProRes, so no limitations there. You also get the ability to use EF glass, as well as any other type of glass that can mount to a speed booster or an adapter to that reduced flange distance of Micro Four Thirds mounts, which is great. So all of that ability, unlimited recording, nice. But now you look at the 6K, it's $24.95, so well over $1,000 more. And for an additional $1,000, what you get is improved highlight roll-off, slightly higher resolution with the same modes, technically 6K at 50 frames per second, or you crop into the video footage, you get 60 frames per second, or pretty much 2K at 120 frames per second. So higher resolution, but then you limit ProRes to the lower resolution modes, and then Blackmagic RAW is limited to the higher resolution modes, increasing your need of storage space when it comes to SSDs, SD cards, or CFast cards. And then you get taken away from you the ability to adapt different lenses, and you have to use the EF mounts. Sure, you'll get a focal reducer, possibly, but right now you're still limited on the glass. You don't have the ability to put in anything that you would have had if you would have had the RF mounts, such as ND filters and the like. So all in all, losing the ability to adapt glass and gaining highlight roll-off and higher resolution, you have to pay over $1,000 more. And that's when you start to realize that cost seems to be a bit drastic for the trade-off. But it might be absolutely crucial to you if you're at that higher level, that cinematographer mark. Then you know, compared to the competition, it's a steal. But when compared to somebody who's coming in and adapting to cinema grade cameras, and then you just go to that price point with only a limited amount of features that might not be necessary, then that price point doesn't seem right. Anyway, that's my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Like, share, and as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. I love Blackmagic. They're still making this talk pretty interesting. See you guys later.